Dominic,
Hello, Leila. How are you? Oh, I'm very well, thanks. And you?
Good, thank you. My guest today is Dominic Daula. That's how you say your surname, Dominic?
Yes, 100%.
And Dominic came into my orbit happily a few weeks ago when he had watched the conversation I had with Kirsten Dawes from Boulez Hall, and he, being a College of Music graduate as well originally, decided to get in touch. And he wrote such a fascinating letter to me that I decided I needed to have a conversation with him. So welcome, Dominic. Dominic is currently doing his doctorate at the University of Cape Town, writing his thesis on a composer, British composer called Alan Bush. Is that right?
Yes.
And he's working with D.M.A, who is my dear friend in Cape Town. And James actually studied in London in the 60s with Alan Bush. So, Dominic, I have lots of questions for you. And some of them, if you don't want to answer, just tell me. But the three basic questions are how, why, and where. Right. So tell me, what started you on your journey with music?
Wow. I'll try and not be as loquacious as I usually am. But what I'll say is, just to comment briefly on what your wonderful introduction. It's very nice that you said I wrote you a letter. I like to, be generous in my correspondence. So I'm glad you appreciate that. But the how and the journey, you could say officially it began when I was about 12 years old. I started piano lessons with a wonderful man called Dr. Widor du Toit. Widor being no mistake to the French composer Charles-Marie Widor.
Well, first of all, how did you get to him?
Oh, okay. Well, I can tell you that.
Everything.
Well, okay, fine. I'll start at the very beginning.
Yes.
Yeah, fine. I'm from a musical family, I think, or no one played an instrument at home. But at school, there was a choir. I was too young to join the choir, and I was 7 years old. And I watched them perform Hava Nagila, or something like that. And I was so sort of entranced that I gathered everyone at home and started conducting them, what I just heard at school. Of course, a very corrupted text, being 7 years old. But then I started piano lessons with a lady called Mrs. Arthur, and that wasn't I didn't really click at that point. But then 2 years later, when I was about 12, I asked my mother for lessons, and we went to the music shop in East London, where we bought a piano. And they gave us two names. One was Maddie Putter, and the other was Widor du Toit. And I wanted the lady because I objected to being taught by a man. And anyway, the lady's studio was full, so I ended up going to Widor. So that's the whole story. But Widor himself is a phenomenal pianist. East London, where I grew up, was a very, very small town or small city. And at his prime, Widor's prime, he was, an active recitalist playing Chopin, Liszt, Rachmaninoff, Brahms, that kind of repertoire. So anyway, Widor took me on, and I accelerated very quickly to the point that, within 5 years, by the time I finished after 5 years, I had learned a great deal from him. I studied a lot of Beethoven and Mozart, and he taught me a lot about music history, and I got a very thorough education from him. So by the time that I got to university, in some ways, I felt that some of the topics that were being discussed, such as, the quality of editions and scores and so on, musical editions, we had already discussed that. He was able to, I think, try and nourish that curiosity as best he could. So I think very highly of him, as you can tell, probably.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because when I started, and I started at 5, I was blessed with a wonderful music teacher as well. And she also taught, we learned everything. We learned harmony and counterpoint and theory and a bit of history of music. So when I got to the College of Music, by the time I got to the college, I was surprised. I mean, that there was quite a large intake the year that I started at college, but I was surprised by the number of students who entered who had no idea about the theoretical stuff at all. So I think I always, afterwards, when I started teaching music, because that's what I did, I incorporated whatever she did. I mean, I was there to teach music and the love of music. And you can't separate the theory and the stuff out of what's going on. Yes.
You know, when I was studying with Widor in those early years, I was doing competitions and doing very well at them. But, the whole idea was that there was this sort of inkling that if you're interested in all this extra stuff, there's something wrong with you, as a teenager. But the whole idea is to understand the music. There's a great deal of work you must do outside the piano or away from the piano.
Absolutely.
And the earlier you get into that, the better. And so I kicked myself for, feeling bad about being curious about all these historical topics and theoretical topics, because as you say, when you get to teach it, you can draw on all these, perceptions and all these aspects that feed into your appreciation.
So then, at that point, you decided to go to the College of Music, or what?
Yes, well, yes. Widor had ideas that I should go to University of Cape Town. He wanted to send me to Ronald du Toit, who I studied with there. So it was all kind of pre-planned. He wished for me to go there. And the funny thing is that I decided to study music at the very sort of last day, for applications. I had applied for other things, but my mother finally said to me, I think you should study music. And that was such a relief, because, you always fear, there's always that sort of stereotypical fear of, making a living in music. I hear lots of pianists who are, I think, very privileged to say that, they love music and they couldn't think of doing anything else. But you feel like, you've got to get a proper job. Music, won't be a proper job. My mother said to me, I should think of doing music. So, and I was too afraid to bring it up with her. So then I came to Cape Town. On the very last day, I asked to be considered for music, and I had an audition. And it was a wonderful time. I played Beethoven Sonata Opus 90 and Bach Toccata in D major 912. So I played that and answered a few questions. And yeah, the rest is history. I came the next year. And I spent 5 very happy years there before going to Manchester.
What led you to Manchester, number one? And how long were you in Manchester? And why did you come back to South Africa?
Okay. What led me to Manchester? It's the whole, how can I say it? I had discovered Bush already before I went to university. So, if you read about Alan Bush, you read about Ronald Stevenson. Ronald Stevenson was, his comrade in art. And Ronald Stevenson spent many years, not many, but 2 years in Cape Town. And Ronald Stevenson spent, lecturing there at UCT. Chisholm brought him there. And anyway, Stevenson had studied, I believe, at Royal Manchester College of Music. And anyway, so it seemed to me a place that I wanted to explore. There were quite a few South Africans who'd been to Royal Northern and had enjoyed their time there. And I could hear they played very well. So I thought to give it a shot. And they were very friendly when I applied there. And I didn't have to travel there, which was very nice economically. And all I had to do was just record a video, and I got a scholarship on the spot, which was very nice. I never knew that you never sort of are aware of what you can do, until someone tells you what they think of you. And it was very nice to get that appraisal. I was there for 2 years for a master's, and I came back for a number of reasons. I wanted to come back to South Africa to do a PhD, because James, we really have, go way back. He's the supervisor who gets me, and we've got this wonderful rapport. And also, when I was at Manchester, the University of Cape Town actually gave me a scholarship to study there. So I thought it'd be good to as a gesture of thanks, to come back and do a PhD here. It turns out to be very expensive to live, abroad. And when the scholarship came from UCT to say that I can study at RNCM, I thought that it would be good to come back and do a PhD there, back home to see who values you, not to say that I wasn't valued in Manchester, but, the people who make a difference, sometimes you must, thank them. You mustn't, forget them. So that's why I came back, and I'm very happy to be back here, at least for now, because I feel like I'm in the right place to do it.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
I enjoy, in a teaching context. I mean, I was very fortunate when I was an undergraduate to be given the opportunity to be a teaching assistant, where and it wasn't just being the teacher's skivvy. I ended up being responsible for some courses and also teaching undergraduates piano. So I'd love to be in some kind of academic context. It'd be very nice.
Yes.
And but there are various other ways you can do it. I mean, perhaps one can go into that kind of how can I say it, project management, in terms of working for concert series, because I like organizing concerts, I like programming events, so you can go into that kind of administration. But I very much, I think, hope to be part, to make a difference in terms of teach and to conduct research, because I'm an obsessive person. I need to feed my obsessions into something, that in a place that nourishes that kind of aptitude or inclination. So universities, you can do that kind of research there, and you can share ideas there, and you can inspire other people there, because people there, who actually want to hear about you talk about particularly niche topics, would come to university to hear experts talk about these things. So I'd very much like to be in that kind of context. But, things can change, obviously.
So it's interesting, when I was at college, with James, we were there the same years, which was the late 50s, early 60s. There were only 2 people of color in our year. One was a very, very lovely voiced tenor called Joseph Dlamini, and who James told me has got a good job somewhere teaching. And the other one,
an actual Black African, really?
Yes.
Wow. I wouldn't have thought that. Yeah.
But the point being, in those days, those horrible days, it was okay. We were all students together when we were in the building, and nobody thought anything about anything, except when we wanted to go out for lunch or coffee. They couldn't come with us because the bloody apartheid. What proportion of the students these days at college? I guess the last year has been a mess up, but what proportion of the students at college are people of color?
That's a difficult question. I would say mostly, the demographics, speak for themselves in this country. But of course, in certain
They didn't always.
Yes, yeah, in certain disciplines, exactly. If I can think about my time,
Yes.
When in my studio, in Francois' studio, there were about 2 Black people in the studio.
Right.
So it depends. I would say over 50%, but certainly not over 75%.
And in all disciplines of music, like singing and piano, cello, whatever?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of people of color in, the opera school and pursuing vocal studies. But I think the numbers are increasing now for, the piano and cello and violin. They were, I think, more sort of white dominated, but I think that is changing. And in African music, there would usually be 1 or 2 white people. So, that's the thing. But I must say, the exception to African music is yes, the full-time students are mostly people of color, but there's a huge appetite from those from outside, usually American students who are coming in for a semester. They come and, experience African music.
So there is a department of African music studies at the college now, right?
Yes. Yes, it was. It exists.
Is that what, what does that mean? Does that mean all African or South African or what?
Well, yes, it's a very gray area. I would say that's where there's some segregation because the Western classical students and the jazz students, practice in the college buildings, but the African music students, they have some space in the building, but their main hub is, outside in a separate building altogether. So you don't really see each other in a place called the Stables, but now renamed C-Sharp Cottage. I'm not bad-mouthing anyone, but African music itself also exists with ethnomusicology. There's a kind of overlap there. So what I do understand is that they do have instruments, like the local South African instruments, the mouth bows and so on, and that they also have the kora and other sort of instruments from the African continent in general, and the amadindas and so on. So I think it is more globally African, but I don't know how the curriculum is really structured. But I do know that there are people who do research work in music in Nigeria and so on. It's not totally
Right.
to South Africa. There are also modules on South African sort of commercial music as well. That's also part of the ethnomusicology section. But I never had much to do with African music when I was an undergraduate.
Would you say that, okay, so I would imagine, as far as you are concerned, with your brain and your training, the world is your oyster. I mean, you can actually go and get a job teaching anywhere.
Well, I hope.
The emphasis, certainly in the States, I don't know about England because I'm not there, is on Black composers and Black musicians and opportunities and all that sort of thing. And then there comes somebody like you. Your interest is all in, it's contemporary music, British oriented. Um, how? What? How does that happen? I'm just fascinated.
How
You
does it
break
happen?
all the rules, and I love it.
I'm so pleased that Samuel Coleridge Taylor has finally been discovered by everyone because I first discovered him as a 15, 16 at the back of an Augner's catalog.
Oh my
And
God.
they dedicated a whole page to all his compositions, and
Yes.
a lot about him. And, I listened to Hiawatha and I was so impressed that there was someone, like me almost, who existed. But how does it come about? I think it's just when you enjoy music. I don't think I was brainwashed by anyone, but I think it's when you just like the music and you want to just find out history, and one thing leads to another, and then you end up having all this knowledge about something, and then it just becomes your area of expertise in a way. It wasn't, people sometimes politicize music and say that because it belongs to Britain or belongs to France, it's their music, their repertoire. And if you're an outsider coming in, or geographical outsider coming in, that you're trying to be like them. I think there's that perception that you want to become like them, but you're just interested in the music. It just happens that it's by this person.
Yes.
So that's how I've had the the interests that I've cultivated. And I'm also interested terribly in Baroque music. I took harpsichord as a second instrument, so I've played lots of French music and lots of Bach,
Yes, of
but
course.
you always get told, you have to be marketable as a musician. You have to have something that distinguishes you from the rest. And I found South African music and, new music and British music, there's so many interconnections, first of all, but it seemed to be a field where, I could, enter and, do some work in. Rather than working in already very heavily populated fields of study, trying to be another Beethoven scholar, another Bach scholar. And also when the resources are there, and resources even being people like James, who I can talk to you about, Alan Bush or so on. You have to have these people around you. And I have the good fortune of having these people around you, and then it's easier that way. It's harder now. It's harder, especially as a young person, to, want to, let's say, study about black composers in the Cape Colony, let's say, before 1910, let's say, because the resources aren't there for various reasons.
Yes.
And, the fieldwork you'd have to undertake, you need to already be experienced as a scholar to do that kind of work. It's something I'd be open to doing later, but, you have to, cut your teeth in something where it's something where there's been a lot of work done. So to be doing work on British composers, it just happened that way because I just like the music. So, but I don't think it has a Union Jack on it.
Yes.
And it's just insatiable curiosity, I was listening to Elliot Carter as a teenager, and Benjamin Leese as a teenager, and but aesthetically, sometimes something just doesn't sort of gel aesthetically. But when I listen to Fricker, Peter Racine Fricker or Ronald Stevenson, I'm like, oh, this is such profound and thoughtful music. So that is just how I've come to where I am.
I could listen to you for hours and hours. And you just said something which was leading me to another question. Of course, now it's gone out of my head since you went back to Ronald Stevenson. Oh, yes, I know what it is. So you said that you run a little concert series in Cape Town?
No, I don't really, but I've organized quite a few little symposia, on various things. I haven't done that in a long time, but I did one on Eric Chisholm because it was 50 years since his death. And so I did one on him, but it wasn't all on Chisholm. So it was Chisholm and contemporaries. And so anyway, that's how I started, playing around with programming. You could say more popular repertoire that I did with my piano duo partner was about 4 years ago, where we did a concert, music of two pianos, where we featured Vision de la Main by Messiaen and The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. So we kind of played with the idea of music sacred and profane, the kind of idea.
Yes.
And that was a very successful occasion. And it gives me great joy to bring, to marry, you could say, esoteric repertoire with, repertoire that we all know and love. Playing, let's say, Brahms and Couperin, for instance, something like that. I always try to have a nice mix, or to commission music from living composers and try and see what kind of context they would fit into historically.
Well, I think, first of all, what I've learned, and I'm still learning, after 41 years of doing what I'm doing, every day I still learn something new that I didn't know. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's wonderful. And I guess that's what keeps me going.
It's a sign that you're in the right field, when you feel like you don't know everything yet.
Oh, totally.
And that you never will know everything. Yeah.
No, because just when you think, I mean, I used to, in the early days, there used to be, don't ask me how or why, but for the first 4 or 5 years of my presenting, you could always be sure of selling the same number of tickets at the box office on the day of the concert as you had sold in advance of the concert. It was like a formula. I don't understand it. I don't know. But then it stopped. So just when you start to figure that you know what you're doing, the ground shifts underneath you and says, no, you don't know what you're doing. You got to start all over again. So it's a continuous journey. And I think the important thing is to know what you don't know. Now, I've kind of saved the most difficult question for last. So I think that maybe you're going to be able to help me find an answer, because number one, I would imagine you've got a very musical ear. And I think one of the things that musical ears do is pick up on accents. Okay.
Yeah.
So my biggest surprise.
Yeah.
I guess the last time I was in South Africa was 6 years ago.
Okay.
And I hadn't been for quite a long time before that. And the thing that made the biggest impression on me was the fact that I noticed that Black people were now speaking like you with white South African accents. Black people used to have an accent all of their own. And you now have a different accent. How the hell does that happen?
That's a very interesting question. You know, I'll talk about the Black accent, first of all. I think, you know, it's somehow become it's an educational thing, obviously, first of all. You know, when there was what you call integration, you know, whatever, early 90s, 1991, whatever, when, you know, Black people could go to former Model C schools,
Yes.
you know, that was the first instance of transition. You know, you're around, you know, these white people, and you're around these white teachers, and it's their home language, and so you end up being part of that system. You know, it's the transition that happened, that we were now surrounded by white teachers and we had white friends. So, you know, again, the accent doesn't wear a flag. The accent doesn't have a skin color. It's just music coming out of your mouth. It's just your surroundings. And some people sometimes think that, you know, you're trying to be white, but that's just it's just the environment that you're in. It's not put on. It's not an affectation. You know, a lot of people, you know, confront me and they say, oh, you must have studied to speak like this. How is it possible? It's not possible. You just spend time with people and socialize with them. And, you know, you literally, it's imbibed, it becomes part of you. It's your means of expression. But I do think it really is about being taught in English by teachers whose first language is English, and you are surrounded by peers whose first language is English. So naturally, you start to speak like them. Just like how people go to, I'm sure, you know, if you go to Germany or something, I'm sure there'll be something of an accent there if you spend
Yes,
much
of
time
course.
there. Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for doing this. I want to say I am so happy you've come into my life.
Oh, wow.
And I want to keep in close touch with you. Okay?
You have my word. I'd be honored to keep in touch with you. Thank you for extending that invitation to me, because I know what a busy life you lead.
Yes, but you know what? I can learn so much from you. And I really need people like you around me. So thank you. Give my love to James.
Oh, I will. Thank you.
And look after yourself. And I look forward to talking to you more in the future.
Oh, that sounds great. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye, Dominic.
Yes. Bye.